New car blues. Gotta get all the bugs out. Like right here. Vacuum pump ain't working. That's why I'm retired. I don't have time for this. I thought the linkage was fixed.
I think it's look like I free playing it.
Huh? Please subscribe, like, and share. Hello, good morning, good day, good evening, whatever part of the world you're tuning in from. Welcome to Ben Alameda Racing. Today we'll talk about what everybody calls a backfire. The problem with that saying is that backfire, usually when you hear the car go down and a pop or a backfire happens in exhaust. Well, technically that's not really a backfire. The backfire happens on the intake side of the equation. When the car takes off suddenly and you're in an intake pop, yeah, that's a backfire. Backfire from the combustion chamber. Now the one that happens in exhaust is called an afterfire. And I'll explain these two things differently here, or I'll explain it so it'll become a little bit more clear, because sometimes when somebody says to me, oh, the engine backfires, I always usually give everybody a blank look like, what do you mean backfire? Oh, coming out of the exhaust. Oh, because it's on the back. That's why it's backfiring, right? But really, let's break it down. Excuse me. First thing is, what causes backfire? And what causes afterfire? And can they happen at about the same time? And we will look into that and explain it. Because I like to have a better understanding of what's really going on, because many times, and a lot of people correctly say, oh, it backfired because it's lean when you get on the throttle. Correct. But when you ask people, could you explain to me what actually happens? Where does that backfire come from? From the intake manifold or the throttle body or carburetor? What precipitated that and what caused it? And they'll say, lean! But how did that lean condition actually start that, sequence of events to create a backfire? And you will get all sorts of different opinions. But anyway, I will try to keep it simple and concise, and maybe we have a better understanding of what is really going on, guys. Okay, so here we go. Backfire is an ignition that is present in the intake ports, to the intake manifold, to the carburetor or fuel injection throttle body, and that's where you see this fire come out. Instead of being consumed and contained inside the combustion chamber, it goes out to the intake. Sometimes a leaking intake valve can do such a thing, or also a floating intake valve can also, when they slam shut, okay, during the compression, the to the ignition phase, or a leaking intake valve that bounces during the time that the intake valve supposedly closed, and the ignition starts to occur, and therefore there's a possibility that all this burn front goes past the leaking intake valve through the intake manifold. That's one of the reasons. But when everybody says it's lean, that is perhaps the most common, instead of a leaking intake valve, due to the fact that, remember, when you're in a lean condition, the fuel molecule, let's say this is the combustion chamber, the contained closed combustion chamber. valves are closed, the fuel molecules, if they're dispersed effectively, you have pretty much a uniform combustion condition inside the combustion chamber. When they say, and everybody says this, you're lean, buddy, that's why you're backfiring through the intake. That is correct. But what actually happens, the scenario inside the combustion chamber on a lean condition, okay, instead of having a stoichiometric or your 12-9 or 12-1 for power, or 12-5, whichever ratio you plan on running to make the best power. When the situation is lean, 15-1, okay, 16-1, they will fire. But here's the issue. What actually fires are inside the combustion chamber. If it's lean, there are still rich areas that would possibly ignite or readily ignite. But the lean areas, since the fuel molecules are far away, it burns from one molecule to the next, to the next, to the next. All right? What actually happens here is that the burn front is slow, very slow, because it takes a longer distance to go from one fuel molecule to burn to the next. Therefore, when this combustion is started or initiated by the spark, it goes through, okay, when the exhaust valve opens, guess what? There's still remnants of that fuel that is still burning slowly, and it goes through the exhaust port, past the exhaust valve, and during the overlap, when the intake valve starts to open, guess what? There's still remnants of that. Still a continuing slow burn. So guess what? During overlap, when the intake valve starts to open and the exhaust valve start to close, sometimes during reversion, some of the still burning embers in the exhaust port, as well as inside the combustion chamber, that's still going on when this intake valve opens up and the exhaust valve starting to close. Some are coming back. Here's the situation that happens. When the small embers inside the combustion chamber sees this fresh air and fuel comes in, guess what happens? Comes in, boom, lights up to the top of the intake valve. Okay, to the intake manifold, hence throttle body and carburetor. There's the issue right there. It actually burned the incoming air and fuel because of the slow burn situation. Remember, because it's lean, some of the initial or richer ones already got consumed, but the remaining embers or ignition fronts are still there. Okay, through the whole ignition cycle, to the opening of the exhaust valve, through the closure of the exhaust valve, and the overlap, and that's where it sees it. And I'll explain to you later on what afterfire means as well, using this scenario, but in reverse. There are other instances where a leaking intake valve, all right, when you have this issue that's big enough, when the intake valve closes, of course the exhaust valve closes, you initiate ignition before top dead center. The expanding gases got a lot of pressure, and they go through that leakage and into the intake port and light it up. Boom! Same thing. Okay? So there are other factors as well. A very thin valve margin. If you notice a knife, when you heat up a knife with a torch, the edges that are thin starts to glow, and that's a point of ignition. The intake valve, the seat or the margin on the edge of the intake valve, when that is thin, it will also glow. And same thing with the, of course, the intake valve on the very corners of the combustion chamber where it's lean. And I explained that in my other previous videos, where this is where a point of ignition starts, or auto ignition, and when it goes over there, it lights up. You get detonation, or sometimes when it heats up right there, it starts to glow around the margin as well, of the intake valve, and when the new air, fresh air fuel comes in, it sees that edge. Guess what? It'll light up as well and create a backfire. So valve margin creates a backfire. Any oil or buildup of carbon around the whole combustion chamber. That's why you notice when a lot of engines are tired, the seals are leaking. You will hear and see this backfire that is from the oil that is present inside the combustion chamber. Also, another scenario is if you don't have enough accelerator pump volume on your carburetors. All right, when the sudden acceleration, or you mash the pedal, the port pulls in, and consequently the lighter air molecules get drawn in inside the combustion chamber faster than what the heavier fuel molecules could do or can do, because since they're heavier, they're lagged behind the air mixtures or the air column, and here comes the fuel molecules right behind it because it's heavier. Here you have an issue with backfire, all right? Because when it yanks the air column first and then the fuel molecules go right behind it, then suddenly the intake vent is closed. Even though your air fuel is really correct at high RPM or at high engine speeds, it's your stoichiometric, it should burn eventually, but on a rapid acceleration, where you open the throttle and start to accelerate, sometimes by the time the intake valve closes, the fuel molecules lag farther behind the air column. And once the intake valve shuts, guess what? You have an issue with very lean condition inside the combustion chamber. All right? So that's why you need an accelerator pump to basically add fuel by means of a diaphragm squirting fuel, additional fuel in front of the, or at the same time as the air column is coming in, to prevent lean out. But at the same time, this can also happen with fuel injection. If the injectors are somewhat big, there might be a little bit of lag on the fuel spray, or a hose in the bucket type scenario. Remember the mist, the bigger the injector is, the more ineffective it is at the lower RPM. So sometimes they put two injectors, the smaller one, which reacts faster and sprays consequently a better mist of fuel to come into the combustion chamber, as opposed to a big injector, which is lazy and got a lot of unmystified globals of fuel molecules. All right, too much liquefied form. You need a mystified condition to combust properly inside the combustion chamber. So all these things can happen. Big injectors, even though it's capable of keeping from leading up, but at low RPM can be troublesome. That's why you put staged fuel injectors. The smaller one, more mystified, reacts pretty quickly on the lower RPM, and then the big ones with the the hose into the bucket scenario, spraying all that fuel in there. All right, it's great, but it's slow reacting, and it's not really in a very mystified form as opposed to a smaller injector. Those can also create lean conditions at the lower RPMs. Another onset of lean mixtures is the fact that there is an absence or lack thereof of mixture motions. The tumbling effect to the cylinder, as well as the mixture enhanced by swirl, this rotation coming into the cylinder. So when you have this and this, okay, it enhances the mixture and gives it a more homogeneous state when the intake valve closes. Any inadequate issue here, then you'll feel a lot of hesitation, not responsive in a sense, because it's not thoroughly mixed. Just remember, when you look at, when you have a contained column of air fuel here, let's say a stoichiometric ratio, and then you just keep it dormant, you open the top and you throw a match, it'll go in there, it may light up or it might not. Hopefully when it reaches the bottom or middle part, it'll light up. That's what you hope. Now, when you introduce this issue, tumble, like coming into the port to the combustion chamber or to the cylinder. You do this, and then so you do this. Couple guys, I don't want to test it here, probably blow myself up, but you guys see the point. When you mix this cup of fuel and air at the right ratio, do this. You take off the top, bring the match in, it will basically light up because you have all these saturated and mixed up fuel molecules with the air in there. Now the second mixture motion is swirl. So basically when you do this, okay, and then you mix it at the same time. So you do this, and then take off the top, light it up, guess what? Now you turn it this way, up and down, and side to side. Now you're much more mixed. And then when you throw the match, I bet you just on the top, before it even gets inside, it'll already light up. That is combustion. If you have dormant issues inside the cylinder, rich, lean, whatever, then you're going to have the richer mixture will burn readily, lazily, and colder than stoichiometric or a thoroughly mixed up air-fuel ratio. And the ones that are lean areas are slower burning. So you have a combination of very, very inadequate and not really what you call ideal condition. And lastly, you also have the issue of when it's inside the combustion chamber, it already lights up. I said 30 degrees before TDC, you initiate combustion. There's a sphere, an initial sphere of flame front that starts to expand, and by the time it really expands, when it approaches TDC, this is the critical area of the ignition phase, when if you don't have any quench pad, right, it could accelerate to an explosion. But we have the quench, the top of the piston to the combustion chamber, approaching TDC, 10 degrees before, 5 degrees before. When it starts to speed up already, then suddenly it sees this quench, it does this. Alright? It stops it a little bit from accelerating to a fast burn / explosion. Not anymore a fast, it becomes an explosion. The issue here is that this quench slapped them and breaks them again and create a longer combustion event, or enhances the combustion event. And therefore you've kind of prevented an explosion inside it without the quench. Alright, if it's wide open there. The critical 10 degrees before TDC, 5 degrees, now it gets really super shaky. It tends to go fast burn to an explosion. There's no quench to stop something and further mix it again. Nothing. Basically, the quench is like a speed bump. Alright? It stops it, but also enhances the combustion. Without it, then it accelerates and goes kaboom inside. Whereas if you have the quench, it tends to get in between the tight spot and gets him to slow down, and then when that really comes in effectively, they collide. And here we go, boom, enhances the burn. So that any of those areas that are not combusted properly will be enhanced by this quench, which is a mixing medium. Wow, the exhaust are speeding up. So on the tight part of the quench, they come in, all right, and make a collision of the still not consumed air and fuel mixtures within. And also the quench, the proximity of the piston to the quench part of the combustion chamber helps to cool the piston, or cools the engine, and plus the combustion chamber. Without the quench, the tendency is to run hot, and it's prone to detonation around those areas that were not slapped around and got woken up to burn themselves. Okay, those dead areas suddenly sees a pressure and temperature spike, auto ignition. Secondaries. So the quench plus the end gases on the surface of the piston and around the areas of the combustion chamber is the parts that conducts the heat and transfer it to the combustion chamber and to the water jacket, so forth and so on. Plus the thickness of the ring. The top of the piston gets reflected with all that heat. It goes through channels, puts all that heat to the rings. So if it's too thin, the tendency will also get hot. Okay, so sometimes the thickness of the ring has a good capability to transfer the heat to the cylinder wall and hence to this water jacket. So when you have one of those open combustion chamber, okay, and then at the same time you have a state-of-the-art super thin metric ring, well, guess what? Piston really gonna run hot. Combustion chamber is gonna run hot. You have no quench. You have no end gases to help you cool down. Like I said, the proximity of the piston top, which has a lot of heat, and the combustion chamber quench pad transfers the heat. Without those two elements, you're gonna run hot and you're gonna have detonation. I hope it's clear. Now we touch on afterfire, the backfiring through the exhaust pipe. That is the correct term, not backfire. That's on the intake. But what actually happened here? Usually, if it's a rich mixture, a lot of unburned fuel going out the exhaust pipe, be it one cylinder or multiple cylinders, if it's extremely rich. While some of these are unburned fuel molecules going down in a superheated condition. Some of you see header pipes glowing orange, that is hot. But sometimes still not enough to create combustion within. Because remember, when it's got a lot of fuel molecules, it's kind of hard to ignite it or light it up. But here's the issue. Once you're in the intake exhaust valve, coming down the exhaust pipe, very, very rich mixture. Okay, still, and then another cylinder is misfiring, or also rich air-fuel mixture comes in right behind it. Now you have a column of very rich condition inside the primary pipe. And then when they get to the collector, or in case of alcohol type thing, you have a Zumi, head or no collector. Once this column of rich mixture under intense pressure and temperature sees fresh oxygen at the end of the exhaust column or exhaust pipe collector. Right here is very, very nice condition, great for combustion, lots of oxygen, cool, and suddenly this column comes in and sees this very, very favorable condition for combustion, gets to closer to the atmosphere, this superheated rich mixtures, sees this favorable oxygen rich condition, boom, guess what? Boof! You see all the column lights up inside the primary pipe and out the exhaust. That is what you call an afterfire. Okay? There you go. What actually happens there is that, like I said, this rich mixture sees a favorable atmospheric condition at the end of the exhaust pipe or collector, and once it approaches that, it'll light up. So that is one aspect of that. Now at the same time, you gotta realize that any kind of ignition miss, let's say one cylinder is missing, it can also do that condition. But before we proceed, you see some guys sometimes say, hey man, look, listen to my exhaust pipes on the back of the bumper, and it's going pop, 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 usually, right? Then sometimes you hear the pop, 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 push, guess what? There's a leaking exhaust valve. Okay, that is a leaking exhaust valve or broken valve spring, or definitely, a leaking exhaust seat could do that. All right, it's like a sputtering type sound. So I've seen that happen, and by the time we pulled the heads off, exhaust valves, they were cooked, and so were the seats, pitted big time. And just did a lap job on it, cheap repair, slap it back up, fire up, continues. Now it's nice. The guy goes, wow, that was easy. All right, so that's just something to think about. All right. Good backfire and afterfire happen at the same time. Now you have superheated condition. Okay, let's say the burn was indeed slow. All right, and it goes through the exhaust phase or exhaust stroke, and all that ignition or burn has been consumed. But now you have the presence of hot ignition gases on the exhaust pipe, primary pipe, and you still have the overlap now happening. Intake valve starts to open, the exhaust valve starts to close. You have superheated exhaust gases here, and here it comes through the intake, and the exhaust valve is closing through reversion, a backflow to the combustion chamber, sees the superheated exhaust gases. Guess what? They meet, just like the afterfire where atmospheric is favorable there and lights up the exhaust. Afterfire, now you're inside the combustion chamber, the gases come in from the open exhaust valve and lights up the fresh air and fuel mixture in the intake. Now you have this woof on the intake and the exhaust. Okay, you didn't blow up your engine, okay? But this happens because of lean condition, a continuous exhaust. Because I've seen some guys go, well, Ben, how can I be lean? It also, blew up on the exhaust pipe. It went poof. The gas launches the intake. That's exactly why. All right. And also, before we close here, a lot of the air-fuel mixture, all right, is not really consumed all the way. You don't want that to be consumed because some of the gases towards the end of the combustion cycle are there to cool. Okay, to cool the combustion chamber. Remember, when you're running lean, mostly, it's probably consumed, and now you don't have any leftover gases to cool the combustion chamber. Now you have overheating issue. Now, let me say something to my overseas friends out there in Asia. A lot of them are running air-cooled engines. When I was in aircraft, when we were finally done with our tune, we changed spark plugs, we're idling our airplane, and there's a mixture lever here. We're idling it, let's say at whatever RPM specified, 850 or 1000 or 600, depends. Okay, radial engine, air-cooled cooling system, barrels. We pull the mixture control all the way back. This is idling at 850. While we're pulling back on the mixture control, you'll see an RPM rise, because now it's a little bit leaner. It speeds up a bit, not like it. If it's richer, it is actually lazy burn to keep it cooled down. So we'll see an RPM rise while I'm pulling down on the mixture lever. It'll go 1100 and then fall off. Now I know I have enough fuel there to cool basically the combustion chambers or the aircraft engine or the radial engine in this particular case. That's how we set our idle mixture. We look for the RPM rise. And I bet you same thing with the motorcycle engines. If you have some kind of pump issue, you shut off the pump and look for that RPM rise. If you see an RPM rise, then you know you're good. Because if you have your leanest mixture setting to have a clean idle with your race bike, or what they call underbone in Asia, or some of them have these boats and they're going like 100 kilometers on water, 60 miles an hour. That's fast. Or maybe 80, 140. They are flying. And I suggest that you guys check your mixture also, because some of them I see are not water cooled but air cooled engines, Hondas or whatever, Kawasaki. So you do that, because without that, you think you're doing your burnout or getting ready and you're warming up. You're actually burning the engine up while you're warming up. So take note. Make sure you have enough mixture there to keep the combustion cans, what we call an aircraft, or your cylinders, cool.